Hello, welcome to this Equation Technologies training video. Today we're going to explore the three most common transactions in the purchase order module: creating a purchase order, receiving product, and creating an invoice for that receipt. Let's start by going to the purchase order module. We'll go to Purchase Order Transactions and Purchase Order Entry. First thing we're going to do is select our vendor number. If you know the vendor number, you could just type it in and hit the Tab key to pull that vendor up. Or you can use the Finder. For today's purposes, we're going to use Intercontinental Electronics. First thing we're going to do is check our date. Now this is pulling up our current date here. We can use the calendar to select any date we want, but for today's purposes, the PO date of today is fine. I'm going to come in and put in an arrival date. This is the day we believe the product should arrive by. We'll leave our PO type at active. There are different types of purchase orders, but for today's training, we're just going to focus in on an active, normal purchase order. Our next field is the ship to location. This defines where the product is going to be delivered to. And we're going to pick location 1, our central warehouse. We're going to tell it our shipping method and our billing location. Sage has pulled the terms code from the vendor record, but this can be changed if needed. Next thing we're going to do is come in and enter an item number. If you know the item number you wish to order, you can enter it now, or you can use the Finder and select the item. It brings up its description. I can enter the quantity I want to order. Let's say for this one, we're going to order 25. And based on other criteria in the system, Sage has entered a unit cost already for us. We can confirm this when we talk to the buyer at the supplier's office, or we can accept the value and change it later. Sage is also bringing up things like the weight. There is an opportunity to enter a vendor item number in the inventory control module. For this item, we have not entered a vendor item number. But this is useful because on the purchase order, what will appear is the vendor's item number unless you've customized it. And just by hitting Tab, I can get a new row. If I have moved off or back onto that record, I can also use the Insert key. Mine happens to be right next to my Delete key on my keyboard, and generate a new line. Go ahead and put in another item number, and I'm going to say 25 of these as well. When I've entered all my various line items, I'm going to hit the Post button, and it tells me my purchase order number, order number 82. And I'm going to go ahead and print the order number. Now, if I have an email configuration set up in the system and an email set up for the vendor, and I use the vendor delivery method, Sage will automatically email the vendor a copy of the purchase order. But for today's training purposes, I'm going to use the print destination, which will just bring the purchase order up onto the screen. So here's my purchase order. Make that a little bit bigger here. Here's my purchase order. Notice that my vendor item number is blank. This is because for these two items, we don't have a vendor item number set up for them. We just have our internal number. Now, many times we do customizations for clients where we put their item number in replace of the vendor item number or next to the vendor item number, so that they can have a number in there if they need to or want to. Of course, a lot of times we add a company logo or make some other changes on here as well. And as I scroll down, I can see the grand total of my order. Now, it's important to remember that a purchase order is not an actual transaction that will hit the general ledger. It is merely a request for goods or services. Purchase orders, in this case, we did a purchase order for product. We can do purchase orders also for non-stock items, or depending upon your configuration, for items not set up in inventory control. That could be for services or a custom one-off item, maybe a specialty piece of equipment or something like that, something that's not going into your regular working inventory. But today we're going to focus mainly on basic purchase order with basic inventory transactions. So again, purchase order is a request for goods or services. We don't actually have an event that triggers anything in the general ledger until we do receipt entry. And that's where we receive the product into Sage. I'm going to open up receipt entry now. Now, if I want to, I can put in the vendor number here, but if I know my purchase order number, maybe it's on the pack list, I could type it in, or I could use the finder here to find my purchase order. I'm going to go ahead and select this one here. So these are for the same items, but it's a different purchase order than the one we just created. And partially we can tell that by eventually, if we slide all the way over here, we can see that the quantity outstanding is 100. So this is a previously issued purchase order for 100 of each unit, not the 25 that we just created our receipt for. I'm going to go ahead and say we're doing a partial receiving on these. So I'm going to say 50 and 50. Now, one thing it's important to note is these this column here, these fields here, there it goes, completes PO. We are not completing the PO intentionally on this. If you receive the final outstanding amount on here, Sage will automatically put this to yes. However, you can come in and tell the system that a receipt completes the PO, and even though you've not received all of the product. But that might be in a situation where you've ordered, say, 10,000 and you've received 9,999, and maybe there was a note in there saying, we're unable to ship the last remaining unit. You can go ahead and mark then that purchase order for that line as complete, even though you've not received all the product, because at that point you're not going to receive any more. But for this example here, we ordered 100 of each and we're receiving 50 of each. So I've put that in, and I'm just going to hit the post button. And I'm generated a receipt number. Some people just write that down on the packing list and hand that over to the accounting department. Some people will print a document to send over with that. Now, there's a couple options in here. Again, these documents can all be customized, but let's take a look at template 01 here for this. And this gives me a form then that I can hand write the amounts that we've received. Some people like this from a positive audit control. I would say the majority of people prefer to use option 3 here. So I'm going to change this from template 1 to template 3 and hit the print button. And Sage is going to save my last used option. So next time I come in, it will show me template 3. But this one I think people like a little bit better because it fills in the pertinent details that they've processed on that transaction. So if you were going to print out a receiving slip and send that on with the pack list to the accounting department, this may be the one you want to use, template 3. So it shows us our quantity received. Oh, let me make this a little wider here. So again, it shows our item number now. So if we had the vendor item number, it would show that here. It shows our item number, the quantity, the unit cost, and the extended cost, and the day that it arrived. And this is useful if you do have a vendor item number or your item numbers differ from the vendor item number. Some people will just use the vendor's item number as their item number, and that's fine. But this could potentially help the accounting department when they're trying to match and do the three-way match between the purchase order, the receiving documentation, and the invoice. Okay, so this is receipt 130. I'm just going to copy that number, make sure I have that in my copy paste buffer here, and I'm going to close. Now let's come here to invoice entry. I'm going to put in my invoice number that I received from the supplier. I could put the vendor number in, or since I know the receipt number, I'm looking up receipt number 130. If I could type the whole thing out, or I'm going to come in, I'm going to use receipt number, I'm going to use contains, I'm just going to type in 130. There it is. And boom, I've pulled up the data here on my screen. Okay, so Sage is going to assume that we're fully invoicing the receipt. So it's got our quantity 50, it's got our unit costs, and it's got our extended cost here. Now let's say we get on the paperwork some information that they didn't charge us $21.97. Maybe it was just an even $21.98 or 99 cents. Let's go 99 cents. Notice how the extended cost has been updated. And I can see my subtotal down here. And I can update my invoice total here because our invoice total needs to be fully allocated across the board. Now, I'm actually going to use my calculator here, or just key in, make this 36. So I'm intentionally increasing this by $25. Let's say there was $25 of freight on this particular transaction. How would I go add my freight? Well, I can come right up here to the additional cost, and I'm going to look at all my different additional costs. And of course, it's important to note that these are values here from our sample company. I'm going to use non-taxable freight, but your system may be set up slightly differently, although most people have an additional cost called FRT for freight. And I'm going to say it was $25. Now, one of the things that the additional costs can do is prorate that cost. And so here we've told the system is saying we're going to prorate the $25 by the weight of the product. So it's going to look at the total weights for each line item and allocate proportionally the $25 to the product costs on those. So that's going to increase the cost. Now, there are other options here. There's a no proration where it's going to then instead look at the GL code that was set up on the additional cost and just expense the freight. Another very common option. Of course, some people might want to prorate by quantity. Some people might want to prorate by cost. And then there's also a manual proration option in here. So if you were to prorate by something else, I know some people do by volumetric weight. So they take the the volume of the product, so they know length, width, and height, and figure that out, take the total volume of the shipment, so on. A little bit of complicated math, but then they figure that out, and then they prorate things manually based on the volume utilized. But we're just going to keep it simple here with prorate by weight. Now, if I needed to, I could change the terms on here. Because we've just accepted the posting date here and the invoice date, and these have the same rules as a P. So you could have this, let's say, back in January, if the invoice came late, and use a February posting period if you've already closed January, but we're just going to use the defaults right here. On our terms code, because there is a possible discount, or if there was a possible discount, I should say, it's going to go ahead and calculate out what the discount date would be and what the discount amount would be for. So if I, for instance, use a 210 net 30 terms here, I'm just going to go ahead and change it on here. Notice that my due date updated, my discount date calculated for 10 days out, and my 2% calculated through. Okay, so I could certainly change sales taxes on here if I needed to. We've got our terms, we've got our additional costs. If we had any optional fields set up, we could enter those values on here, and then I could review the total here on my invoice. I'm going to go ahead and post this transaction. And I've created my invoice. I can now go create additional transactions, and at the end of the day, make sure that the day end processes run. We'll just go do that right now. We'll come here to IC periodic processing and process this through. And this is what's going to take the invoice from the PO module and up to the AP module, and then down potentially immediately, as in our case or other people's cases on a delayed setting, down into the general ledger. It also is what flushes the costing on the receiving document to inventory and updates the GL for the receipt that we've done. Now, one thing that's important to note, and I'm not going to get into it too deep, but if we come to the account set for the item, we can see our payables clearing account. So what Sage does is when we receive product, we debit our inventory and we credit our payables clearing account. Then when the invoice is created, we debit the payables clearing and credit accounts payable. That way we've recorded a liability immediately based on the PO costs, but it's not flushed to accounts payable until we've gotten that invoice. So that is one way that you can actually speed up your month-end close by leaning into that process and going, we don't have to have the invoice immediately because we've already booked the liability in the payroll clearing account. Okay. Now let's talk about a few other scenarios in the PO module that people have a lot. Of course, sometimes you get a shipment from your supplier where they have put several purchase orders together onto one shipment. How do we go ahead and process that? So I'm going to come in here to receipt entry. Now in this case, it is important that we put the vendor number in first. So I'm going to go ahead and type in our vendor number for Intercontinental Electronics. Now, once I do that, this checkbox becomes available from multiple purchase orders, and then I can put in here my purchase order numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and enter several purchase orders. And I'm going to hit the receive button, and I'm going to close. and it's going to bring all the different line items from the different purchase orders onto my screen. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit bigger and then scroll over here, and eventually we should see a field here that indicates what are the various purchase order numbers that we're receiving against. And now the next thing I can do is, let's say I know I've received all of them. I could hit this receive all button, or I can just go ahead and enter the quantity we received. So I know I have, let's say I got 300 of my fluorescent desk lamps. And if I look across here, I can see that I have 50 remaining on this item and then 250 for each on the next set of rows. So I'm going to go 50, 50, 250, and 250. And then here I've got a new item. It's a calculator, and I believe I have 10 on there. Yep, my quantity outstanding is 10. So I'm going to just receive all 10. And so I want to hit my 10. And because this is a lot controlled item, I'm going to say make one lot, and I'm going to hit auto gen. And so it's created my lot. It's pulled up the next lot number in sequence. It's told me I've got 10 in this lot because that's what I said, one lot. So it's put everything into that. And it's defined my expiration date because I've previously set it up for this item to expire 1 year from today. And so I've got my lots, and any of these values can be changed. So if I had maybe done 2 lots, I could do 5 and 5 or 2 and 8 or whatever combination that they sent them to me. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to post my receipt. And it's receipt 131. And I'm not going to print my receipt. Okay, so that was how do we create a receiving document for multiple, against multiple purchase orders. Now let's go ahead and receive our PO 82, but we're only going to partially receive one of the items on here. So we're going to say we ordered, I believe it was 25 on here. So we're just going to receive our fluorescent desk lamps. I'm going to see how this one now says completes. Yes, I'm going to leave this guy untouched. Now, if I wanted to, I could delete the whole row from the receipt entry. That really guarantees that I'm not receiving any of those products, or I can just kind of leave it like this. Deleting the row on the receipt entry does not delete it from the purchase order. And I'm going to hit post. And let's go ahead and print this one just so you can see that this comes up with the last value we used, template 3. And there we are. Okay, let's look at our next common scenario where we've gotten multiple invoices for one receiving document. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to go to my invoice entry. And again, I'm going to put in my invoice number. And if I want to, I can put in my vendor number, or I could just skip to the receipt number. And I'm going to come here to the end and grab receipt 131. Now, it's pulled up all the items on here. But let's say I'm only getting billed for 125 desk lamps and 125 fluorescent bulbs. Depending on the information on the paperwork, I might receive all of this line and a portion of this one, or just a portion of this one. And again, I can look over here at the receipt number, and maybe match stuff up there a little bit based on what I have, or look at that receipt number and drill into it, copy that, open it back up in receipt entry, and see what purchase order number it was invoiced or received against. So in this case, I'm going to say 125 and 125. I'm going to go ahead and delete this detail line so I don't receive it. And I'm going to go ahead and delete these two detail lines so I just have the details of what I'm invoicing. Now, the next thing I need to importantly do is come over here to my fully invoice column, and I need to say no. So again, if I left this at yes, I would not be able to invoice for the remaining quantity. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling it no, I'm not fully invoicing it. There's still going to be items outstanding that I can invoice at a later date and time. And just to keep, here, I'll try and post this and show you what happens here, because I know I'm going to have a problem because my invoice total is the original amount of all of the receipt, whereas I've winnowed this down. So if I hit post, error, invoice total does not match document total of 3,200. So I'm going to come in here, change my total. This, of course, normally should be read off the bottom of the invoice from the supplier. And that's a great way to also help you determine, are there any unit cost differences, any additional costs like freight or something else that needs to be tracked on the invoice. And now that my invoice, though, is correct, I'm going to go ahead and post it. Now let's take a look at what happens when we go to receive the rest of it. Again, I'm going to put in my vendor number, and I'm going to go find my receipt number here. And notice that I've got my 125 remaining. And let's say this invoice matches all the items on here. I'm great. Or if it doesn't, maybe they're not invoicing still yet for these two, I can just simply use the delete key on my keyboard to remove those two lines. I could also set those quantity to 0, especially since they're not lot controlled. And then I can go ahead and post. Oh, I need to change my total here as well, right? And again, we can take a quick look here at the terms and the totals. And when I'm happy, I can go ahead and post this. Alrighty. And then I can finish my process by hitting my day end process and flush them all the way to accounts payable. And if I come up here to accounts payable, AP transactions, invoice batch list. So here are the two batches that we created here. So here's the first one. Again, notice that there's no item information. It is all GL information. And if I want to, I can hit my drill down and I can be taken back to the invoice entry in purchase order and look at the details on here. And then if I look here at the next batch, I can see my two entries. There's my 3277 and my 3331. And if I come down here to general ledger, make this a little bit bigger. So here's the batch from the PO module. This has got my inventory and my inventory clearing for each of the 2 items. And the information that comes in here can be set through your GL integration. I highly recommend not using the default setting, which just puts the vendor number and the vendor name in here. I like to have something like the PO number and the item number coming in as well. Much easier to reconcile at a later date and time. So here we got something along that line where I can see it's an invoice and the invoice number. Again, I still like to have my item number, my PO number, because that's sometimes easier to match up. And you can play with different configurations in there and get one that works for you so that all that information, pertinent information perhaps, lines up and can be easily reconciled. So here is my relief of the clearing account and increase in the AP trade. And then I get the same thing here in the next entry. So here is my purchase order receipt. And here's my other purchase order receipt. And my AP batch. So 1 entry to clearing and 1 entry to clearing. Okay. Hopefully this was informative. If you have any questions, please let us at Equation know at any time, and we'd be happy to take a little gander through the PO module with you.